I will give you an example of how clear our mighty Creator and Redeemer wants the truth to be. When we as scientists go and we look at, well, what is life? Could it have made itself? And we're totally honest with what we find, the answer is incredibly obvious. Life could never make itself. Let me demonstrate.
Okay.
You go into every textbook of biology, and it'll start on a section of biological evolution, chemical evolution. How could chemicals have come alive? And they'll see this experiment where a man named Stanley Miller in 1952 put gases, methane, ammonia, in a cylinder, and he circulated them, and then he added like an explosive spark, and he formed in this flask things called amino acids. Now, for sake of just visual clarity, we're going to think of these balls as an amino acid. He made some of these balls. Now, there are lots of different colors you'll notice here in this container, because these balls link up, like I've shown here, they just kind of link up to form a chain. And the different color balls are like different amino acids, but they have to link up in an exact order. And you have to have 20 different kinds of amino acids, 20 different colored balls. And then they form what's called a protein. Now, a protein is like the most common chemical that everything's made out of. Bacteria, trees, animals, fish, our bodies, they're made out of. Our bodies have about 200,000 different arrangements of these colored beads. Now, again, for clarity, thank you for catching my amino acid. I have a model of what a very long protein might look like. Now, you'll notice this chain has lots of colors. Each of the beads is like an amino acid. They're linked up in a specific order. You have a blue one and two clear ones and a yellow one and a purple one and a brown one and so on. If they're not in the right order, this protein chain doesn't bend and fold the right way. I mean, it has to be a certain order to be your hair. It has to be another order to be your skin. It has to be another order to be hemoglobin in your blood. Let me show you what just one of these protein molecules might look like. Now that's just one protein molecule. There are 200,000 different molecules, each specifically designed, and every color on every one of them has to be in exactly the right spot. How could that happen? Now, when you saw that protein chain coming out, it just went on and on and on. That's a fairly complex 2,000 amino acid protein. Every single one of those beads had to be in exactly the right spot. If even one of them was wrong, if a blue one was switched with a yellow one, that's a disease called sickle cell anemia if that protein was the hemoglobin in our blood that carries oxygen. And then the whole chain doesn't bend and twist quite right because one of them was in the wrong spot. And most people would die of that disease. Now, as you look at this simple model of a protein, pretend just random chance, just evolution's trying to make a protein. And in order for it to function, it's got to be this protein that has a blue amino acid, a green, or a red, purple, yellow, and then another red. All evolution has is a random chance. So somehow random chance has to reach into the container and pull out a ball and put it there. And it has to be exactly the right color at exactly the right spot. It's wrong. It's not even one of the right colors. It's the wrong amino acid. See, statistically, when these amino acids were made, they were all kind of the wrong kind of amino acids. They were the wrong colors. They're the wrong shapes.
In this experiment.
They got a few of the 20 that were needed, but they never even got all the ones they needed. And then they got all sorts of stuff in this experiment that would have stopped the protein chain from linking up. And chance could never put them in the right order. It's like everybody has played with Lego blocks. You know, Lego blocks, they kind of link up. They're different colors. And kids love them. You got a red one, and then you reach in and you grab an orange one and then a green one. And they link naturally. But when this experiment was done, they created a bunch of formaldehydes. It's a chemical that would stop the linking up of these amino acids. Those would be like an end cap. You put an end cap, a little person that doesn't have the little nubs on him. Now you can't continue to make it. That experiment would have made 10 times more of the end caps than it did the Lego blocks. So Everything we learn when we start to understand this experiment says life could not possibly have happened in this way. It's all deception.
That experiment, which they tried to use to prove that life could just happen, actually proved just the opposite, but that is not how it's being reported.
That
it's
was
not what's in the textbook.
Years ago.
That's right, 1952.
And why would it still be in the textbook when it has all these problems? They excluded oxygen, you got the wrong amino acids, you got a bunch of stuff that would stop proteins from forming, you can't get them in the right order, all these problems, and it's still in the textbook because they've never found even a remotely better explanation. And what they have found doesn't work. Do you understand how?
So they have to use that, and they have to lie about it in order to promulgate their fairy tale.
God wants the truth to be known. There's certain things He did. He created life, and He created very different forms of life. And when we observe creation, we find out it is exactly true. But those things are hidden from the students. They're not shown the problems with the experiment. They just pretend this is how life started on Earth. And it's deception. It's not education, it's indoctrination into an atheistic worldview. Now, even if you had all of the parts that you needed for life, all these complex chemicals, could life form? People are under the impression that in laboratories, scientists are making new forms of life all the time. Well, let's do another experiment, because science is about experiments, and let's see, could a complex machine come together all by itself? And I like to call this experiment the magic can of evolution.
Oh, you have a
I've got
magic
a monkey on one
can.
side.
Excellent.
I've got my human being thoughtfully thinking on the other side. Let's just see what the can will do. And I think we can perform this experiment even while we're sitting here at the desk. You notice in the can, we have a pin. Now, a pin is a little machine. I kind of like this one because it says, search for the truth. That's what we should all be doing.
Okay.
So
that's the name of your ministry.
It just happens to be. But this machine, this little complex machine we call a pin, has a lot of parts. It's got a tip specifically designed and molded by intelligence. By the way, this is way less complex than the molecules of life, which we also don't find naturally. It had to be created and designed. It has a spring, has an ink cartridge, and then inside the pin.
And there's actually ink in that tube,
well, it's more than just 7 parts, because the ink cartridge has a metal tip and then has ink, but we'll just call it 1 part.
Oh, okay.
Then we got the tube and the clip and the button, so it goes click, 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 and then we got the little mechanism. So I put all the parts for our little machine into the magic can of evolution.
I bet if you shook that for 100 years, you'd have a completed pen.
You think?
Maybe.
I think it might take a little
million.
while. Actually,
billion.
You think time is the answer, because the more I shake it, the more the parts are going to wear down. So time is going to make the problem worse, not better. So, but it's an open system. Energy can come in and out. So in that famous Miller experiment in 1952, they added explosive energy. So we'll add explosive energy to our magic can of evolution, because in science you have to do experiments, and we'll just see what happens.
All right.
And I happen to have a firecracker that I brought with me here today. So instead of just shaking the can and adding lots of time, we're going to add some explosive energy. Okay, there we go. Drop her in the can and wait. Gotta wait for these things in science, and there we go.
Whoa!
We blow the lid off the can, and when you do experiments, you always have to look and, man, I hate it when this happens, but there's the reassembled pin.
That's incredible. All it took is energy. Add energy and...
No, when I do this demonstration,
incredible.
In churches or schools, the students, they just burst into huge, outrageous waves of laughter, because they understand what they just saw was absurd. It was the absolute height of absurdity that energy, just random energy input, could reassemble a complex machine. You understand there were 2 pins in the can. I just had a fully assembled pin hidden. Now, think about our education system in the Western world, Europe and America, and we influence the education in all the other areas of the world too. The students are systematically being taught that something 1 billion times more ridiculous than what you just laughed at, that just 7 parts of a pin could come together by random energy, that the way more complex, way more numerous parts of life in the simplest single-cell bacteria has hundreds and hundreds of specifically designed parts that don't occur unless they're made by living organisms. The parts of the pin don't occur naturally. The parts of life don't occur naturally. That all that just assembled itself because of some explosion, some Miller's experiment, some strike of lightning.
And they have just pulled a fully assembled pen and substituted it and saying
it's life, life instead of the pin. But it's way more complex. Life's far more complex. It's absurd. It's absurdity. And we laugh at it when we see it, and yet we allow it to be taught to our children. You know, every experiment ever done, and we have spent billions of dollars in laboratories trying to make life occur, trying to create life, trying to get chemicals.
Billions?
Oh, yeah,
billions
for the last
of
100 years.
Yeah.
I mean, all these biochemical laboratories, all these experiments, thousands of scientists, generations of work, going clear back into the 1800s, trying to get chemicals to come together to form life, trying to understand the chemistry of life. Every single experiment ever done has the same result. Life never forms by itself. Even with lots of intelligence involved, we can't make life form. See what science is showing us? God is the only possible explanation that makes sense. And he told us that's what he did.
That is what science tells us, that God is the only reason, only explanation at all.
Okay, now let's move along in the biological world. I want to give you another just poignant example of see, the problem with trying to combine evolution with the Bible and saying, well, God just used evolution. He used the process of evolution to make us, is that the very mechanisms of evolution do not work to explain life. And I want to explain this with a simple creature called the leafhopper. Now, you'll see on the screen, there's a picture of a leafhopper. It's like a grasshopper. I like to call it the Olympic athlete of grasshoppers on steroids, because it can jump, baby. I mean, like nothing else. Its whole body's built to jump with these huge, long hind legs. And the little baby's called a nymph. It's so small, it's like the head of a pin. When it takes off, it accelerates 100 times the acceleration of gravity, 100 G-forces. Now, they test pilots when they're going to fly in jet airplanes to see, can they take high acceleration and banking speeds and so on. When the human body hits about 10 Gs, we're in danger of blacking out. The blood's being shoved out of our faces. I mean, here's a picture, you'll love this, of people in this centrifuge spinning around with 10 G-forces shoved against them. And if you look at that, it's laughable. Their whole faces are pressed back because of the force. Our leafhopper takes off 10 times faster than that. It's like a bullet coming out of a gun. He just literally disappears when he jumps. So here's the problem. Biologists are watching this and they're thinking, that's kind of cool. And you got this little insect, he's walking along in the forest one day and his brain says, jump. Well, that signal has to go down his back and split and go to the right leg and the left leg. But he moves so fast that statistically one of those legs is going to move faster than the other. That's how fast his muscles respond. One of them is going to move faster. So if he's moving like a bullet coming out of a gun and one of his legs is shoving faster than the other, is he going to go in a straight line? He's not. He's going to go sideways. His brain's going to smash against the tree. They're going to go flying over the forest. It's not going to work. It's an unworkable system. So the scientists are thinking, where did this animal come from? They dissected him. They did electron microscope pictures. I think I like this example because my background's engineering. This is what they found deep down inside of that insect. And I think your folks watching will be astounded. It's a set of gears, perfectly formed gears, a right-hand gear and a left-hand gear attached to the right leg and the left leg, so that if one of those legs starts to move faster than the other, it forces both legs to move in perfect unison. They look like they were made in a machine shop by human beings. They're perfectly formed on a microscopic level, little tiny gears. Now, someone who's trained, evolution's a fact, millions of years, billions of years, that's how they're trained to think. They're going to see those gears and they're going to say, wow, look what evolution did. And they think they've answered the core problem. They might as well be saying, wow, look what gobbity-goobity-boop did. They just made up a word. It doesn't explain anything unless you explain how evolution did it.
Right, right.
Evolution supposedly works by random changes, arranging amino acids. If an animal has a random change, it has some advantage, and this does happen occasionally. You know, you have variations in fish. Some fish like cold water, some like warm water. The ones that like cold water survive better there. If that happens over and over again over millions of years, that animal will change and it will become a different animal. And that's taught as a fact. Random changes, advantages. Let's think about these gears. You know, inside of this animal that didn't have the gears, there must have been something. Maybe they were just kind of a couple tumors. You know, they're not locked together. They don't have fins. They don't shape like gears. Even if they're round, how do you turn those into gears? A mutation is like hitting something with a hammer. It's a random change. Going into a machine shop and you hit a piece of metal, hit it again, time after time after time. Even if you hit it for millions of years, is it going to turn it into a gear with fins? And they've got to be a right-hand gear and a left-hand gear. And they've got to perfectly intermesh or they would just lock up and the animal would go extinct. And they've got to have muscles attached to them. And they've got to have tie-down points. And they've got to have signals that go to the brain. And they've got to have instincts that tell the animal what to do with these new gears. It all has to be there at once by randomly hitting it with a hammer. You see, the mechanisms of evolution don't work to explain these features we find in these animals. That insect had to be fully formed, fully functional with everything there at once. And that's what God told us. In 6 days, I made the heavens, the earth, and all that they contain.
So this is incredible that mankind has invented the electron microscope.
Right.
So that they can find something that is
invisible.
Invisible. Can't even describe how this could come about without there being a creator. So really that electron microscope shows the handiwork of God that is far beyond the ability of a man to even manufacture something on that scale.
The height of denial going on in our education system would be like finding that electron microscope buried in the ground and pretending it made itself. That's the kind of thing we're doing with our young children.
Yeah.
And yet, as I mentioned earlier, the man who spent his life studying how the human brain works, first one to teach psychology at Harvard University, after boiling down a lifetime of work, he said there is nothing too absurd to be believed by human beings if you just repeat it over and over and over again. That chemicals could come alive, that the DNA code could write itself, that the leafhopper gears somehow could come about by a random change of mutations. And it's all absurdity, but it's taught over and over and over and over again in our school systems to the point it becomes reality to these students, and then they become the teachers. And the truth becomes silly to them, the idea that God literally created life. They think that's silly because they've been trained to leave it out of their thinking. Honestly, the way science works is it takes observations, it fits them into what it thinks explains it. When enough observations fit that explanation, it becomes a scientific law if nothing ever contradicts it. That should make us very confident that we have the truth and point us in the right direction. And that's what I am saying a true interpretation and understanding of the evidence does. It gives us laws of science. There's a law of biogenesis that Louis Pasteur developed that said life only comes from previously existing life. Never been contradicted. That means life couldn't have made itself. See, the law of science points us to a creator. There's a law of science that says matter and energy can't make itself. Never been contradicted. That points to the fact that the universe couldn't have made itself. There's got to be a creator. And there's enormous problems with the idea that one animal could have turned into another that's just hidden from students. But scientists will say, well, we'll just continue to study and continue to learn and continue to get more observations, and eventually we'll show how it all made itself. See, that is actually faith masquerading as if it's science. Science should be based on experimentation and reproducible observations.